The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Kensington Palace as Prince Harry stepped out of his residence, coffee in hand. He wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans, the kind of casual outfit that made him look like any other young man in London. But he wasn't any other young man. He was sixth in line to the British throne, and even on a quiet Tuesday morning that meant something. Harry had always struggled with the weight of his title. Unlike his brother William, who seemed born to wear a crown, Harry felt suffocated by protocol and tradition. This morning was supposed to be different. He had woken up early, determined to take a walk through the private gardens before his day filled with official duties and carefully scripted appearances. The gardens at Kensington Palace were his favorite refuge. Tucked away from public view, they offered a rare slice of normalcy in a life defined by cameras and expectations. He had walked these paths countless times as a child, racing his brother through the hedgerows while their mother watched with gentle amusement. Those memories felt like another lifetime now. As Harry approached the ornate iron gate that led to the private section of the gardens, he noticed something unusual. A new guard stood at attention, someone he didn't recognize. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his late 40s, with the kind of military bearing that suggested years of service. His uniform was immaculate, every button polished to a mirror shine. Harry barely glanced at him as he reached for the gate handle. He had passed through this entrance hundreds of times. The guards all knew him. This was routine. But the guard stepped forward, his movement precise and deliberate. His voice was polite but firm when he spoke. "Excuse me, sir. I'm afraid this area is restricted." Harry froze, his hand still on the gate. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. He turned to look at the guard, expecting to see recognition dawn on the man's face. It didn't. "I'm sorry," Harry said, his tone carrying a hint of confusion. "The private gardens are closed to visitors at this time," the guard explained, his expression neutral and professional. "I'll need to ask you to use the public pathways." Harry felt a strange mix of emotions wash over him. Annoyance, certainly, but also something else. Something that felt almost like relief. This guard genuinely didn't recognize him. In a world where everyone knew his face before they knew his name, this man saw only a young person in a hoodie trying to enter a restricted area. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Harry began, pulling his hood back slightly. "I'm Prince Harry, I live here." The guard's expression didn't change. He had clearly been trained for situations like this. Every year, dozens of people tried to gain unauthorized access to royal properties by claiming to be someone important or inventing connections to the family. "I understand, sir," the guard replied with the same courteous firmness. "However, I still need to verify your identity before I can allow access to this area. Do you have any identification with you?" Harry almost laughed. Identification. He was a prince. He appeared on currency. His face had been on the cover of every major newspaper in the country. The absurdity of the situation began to sink in. "I don't typically carry identification when I'm walking around my own home," Harry said, trying to keep his tone light despite the growing frustration. The guard remained unmoved. "I appreciate your patience, sir. If you could please step back from the gate, I can contact the palace staff to verify your identity." This was getting ridiculous. Harry glanced around, half expecting to see photographers emerging from the bushes, capturing this humiliating moment for tomorrow's headlines. But the area was quiet. Just him, the guard, and the locked gate between them. "Look," Harry said, lowering his voice slightly. "I know you're just doing your job, and I respect that, but I really am Prince Harry. I've lived in this palace for most of my life. I know every flower bed in that garden. I know there's a bench near the fountain where my mother used to read to us. I know the old oak tree has our initials carved in it from when William and I were 8 and 6. The guard listened politely, but his stance didn't change. "That's all very interesting information, sir. However, without proper identification or verification from palace staff, I cannot allow you to enter this restricted area. I'm sure you understand that security protocols exist for everyone's protection." Harry felt his jaw tighten. Part of him wanted to pull rank, to demand that the guard step aside immediately. He could have the man reassigned or even dismissed with a single phone call. The old Harry, the one who had cultivated a reputation for rebellion and recklessness, might have done exactly that. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the guard's unwavering professionalism. Maybe it was the fact that, deep down, Harry knew the man was absolutely right to question him. Security protocols existed for a reason, especially after the breaches and threats the royal family had faced over the years. "What's your name?" Harry asked, his tone softening. "Sergeant Michael Thornton, sir, Royal Protection Command." "How long have you been stationed here, Sergeant Thornton?" "This is my first week at this post, sir. I transferred from Windsor Castle." That explained it. The guards at Windsor would have known Harry on sight, but someone new to Kensington might not recognize him, especially dressed as casually as he was. Harry took a deep breath, feeling the morning air fill his lungs. The situation was frustrating, yes, but also strangely liberating. When was the last time someone had treated him like an ordinary person? When had anyone last questioned his identity or his right to go wherever he pleased? "Sergeant Thornton," Harry said slowly, "I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't bring my phone with me because I wanted a few minutes of peace before my day begins. I don't have any identification because, frankly, I've never needed it within the palace grounds. But I am Prince Harry, and I would very much like to take a walk through those gardens." The sergeant nodded, acknowledging the situation. "I understand your position, sir. However, I have my orders. The private gardens are to remain secure at all times, with access granted only to verified members of the royal household and authorized personnel. If you are indeed Prince Harry, then I'm certain this can be resolved quickly once I make the appropriate calls." Harry found himself impressed despite his frustration. This man wasn't being difficult for the sake of it. He was following protocol exactly as he should. In a strange way, Sergeant Thornton was protecting Harry by refusing to simply take his word for it. "You know what?" Harry said, a slight smile forming. "You're absolutely right. Make your calls. Verify who I am. Do your job properly." The sergeant reached for his radio, but before he could speak into it, a voice called out from behind them. "Your Royal Highness, I wasn't expecting you to be up so early." Both Harry and the sergeant turned to see Gerald Winters, one of the senior palace staff members, hurrying toward them with a tablet tucked under his arm. Gerald had worked at Kensington Palace for over 30 years and knew every member of the royal family intimately. "Good morning, Gerald," Harry said with obvious relief. Gerald approached, slightly out of breath, and immediately addressed the sergeant. "Sergeant Thornton, I see you've met Prince Harry. Your diligence is commendable, but I can assure you this is indeed His Royal Highness." The sergeant's face finally showed a flicker of emotion, a slight widening of the eyes. He immediately stood at attention and saluted. "My apologies, Your Royal Highness. I should have recognized you immediately." Harry waved off the apology. "No, Sergeant, you did exactly what you should have done. Never apologize for following protocol." But even as Harry said the words, he could see the color rising in the sergeant's face. The man had just refused entry to a prince. His first week on the job, and he had already made what he clearly perceived as a catastrophic error. Gerald unlocked the gate with a key card, stepping aside to allow Harry through. But Harry didn't move forward. Instead, he found himself thinking about what had just happened and what it meant. This wasn't just about a gate and a garden anymore. This was about something bigger, something that had been building inside him for years. The sergeant still stood rigidly at attention, waiting for dismissal, probably expecting a reprimand or worse. Harry looked at the man's face, seeing the worry there, the fear of consequences. It reminded him of so many other faces he had seen over the years. People terrified of making mistakes around royalty, of breaking invisible rules they barely understood. Harry made a decision. Harry turned to Gerald and said something that surprised everyone present. "Gerald, could you give us a moment, please? I'd like to speak with Sergeant Thornton alone." Gerald hesitated, clearly uncertain about leaving a member of the royal family with a guard who had just denied him entry. But he had served the family long enough to recognize when an order was an order, no matter how politely phrased. "Of course, Your Royal Highness," Gerald said with a slight bow before retreating back toward the main palace building. The sergeant remained at attention, his jaw set, clearly bracing for whatever was about to happen. Harry could practically feel the tension radiating from the man. "At ease, Sergeant," Harry said gently, "and please stop looking like you're about to face a firing squad." Thornton relaxed his stance slightly, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for not recognizing you. There's no excuse for my failure." "Failure?" Harry repeated, genuine surprise in his voice. "You think you failed?" "I stopped a member of the royal family from accessing his own garden, sir. I questioned your identity when I should have known who you were immediately." Harry shook his head slowly. "Sergeant Thornton, let me ask you something. If I had been an intruder, someone who looked vaguely like me, or who was confident enough to bluff their way past you, what would have happened if you had simply waved me through?" The sergeant considered the question. "There would have been a security breach, sir." "Exactly, and that breach could have had serious consequences. You've been following the news, I assume. The increased threats against the royal family, the incidents at other palaces." Thornton nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir, that's precisely why I've been so vigilant." "Then you did your job perfectly," Harry said firmly. "You followed protocol. You didn't make assumptions. You treated an unidentified person in casual clothing exactly as you should have treated them. That's not a failure, Sergeant. That's professionalism." For the first time, some of the tension seemed to ease from the sergeant's shoulders. But Harry could see there was still doubt there, still the fear that this conversation would end with consequences. Harry gestured toward a nearby bench, one that sat just outside the garden gate. "Do you have a few minutes to talk? I promise you're not in trouble. Quite the opposite, actually." The sergeant glanced around, clearly uncertain about the appropriateness of sitting down with a prince for a casual conversation. But something in Harry's expression must have convinced him that this wasn't a trap. Slowly, he moved to the bench and sat down, maintaining perfect posture even in this informal setting. Harry joined him, slouching slightly in the way he always did when he was trying to feel less like a prince and more like a person. "How long have you been in the Royal Protection Command?" 12 years, sir. Before that, I served in the Blues and Royals for 8 years. The Blues and Royals, Harry's interest was genuine now. "I served with them myself in Afghanistan. What was your rank?" "I left as a captain, sir. Saw action in Iraq and Afghanistan multiple tour." They talked for a few minutes about military service, finding common ground in shared experiences. Harry learned that Thornton had been decorated for bravery twice, that he had 3 children, and that he had specifically requested the transfer to Kensington Palace because it meant he could be closer to his family in London. "My youngest daughter is 10, Thornton explained, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "I missed too much of her childhood with the overseas deployments. This position means I can be home most nights." Harry felt a pang of recognition. His own father had missed so much of his childhood too, though for different reasons. The burdens of duty came in many forms. "Can I tell you something, Sergeant?" Harry said, his voice dropping slightly. "Something I haven't really talked about with many people." Thornton looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, sir." "I envy you." The sergeant's confusion was evident. "Sir, you can choose to be here. You requested this transfer because you wanted to be closer to your family. You made a decision based on what mattered to you." Harry paused, looking toward the garden gate. "I was born into this. I didn't choose this life, this title, these responsibilities. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to make a real choice about where I want to be and who I want to be." Thornton listened carefully, and Harry could see the man processing this unexpected confession. "With respect, sir, everyone has constraints. I chose this post, yes, but I also gave up a lot to be here. Lower pay than private security work, stricter regulations, less freedom in many ways. We all make compromises." "That's fair," Harry acknowledged. "But you understand the weight of duty, don't you? The way it can feel like armor sometimes. Protective but also suffocating." "I do, sir." Thornton's voice was quieter now, more personal. "After my second tour in Afghanistan, I struggled with it. The duty to serve, the duty to my family, the duty to myself. They don't always align neatly." Harry found himself genuinely interested in this conversation in a way he rarely was during official engagements. There was no script here, no carefully managed talking points. Just two men who had both served, both struggled with duty and identity, sitting on a bench in the morning sun. "When you stopped me at that gate," Harry said slowly, "you treated me like anyone else. Do you know how rare that is? How liberating it felt, even though it was frustrating?" Thornton seemed to consider his words carefully before responding. "I imagine it must be complicated, sir, being recognized everywhere you go, having every action scrutinized." "It's exhausting," Harry admitted. "Some days I just want to be Harry, not His Royal Highness, not the spare to the heir, not the party prince or the soldier prince or whatever label the press has decided fits this week. Just Harry." "If I may speak freely, sir," Thornton asked. Harry nodded. "Please." "You are just Harry. The title, the scrutiny, the expectations of euros, those are things that happen to you, not things that define you. I learned that in combat. You can be a captain, but in the moment when bullets are flying, you're just a man trying to do the right thing. The rank comes after." Harry sat with those words for a moment, feeling their weight. "That's profound, Sergeant." Thornton actually smiled slightly. "My wife says I read too much philosophy. She blames the university degree I finished last year." "You went to university while working and raising 3 kids." Harry was impressed. "Online courses, sir. Took me 5 years, but I finished. History and philosophy. My wife thought I was mad. But I needed something that was mine, you know. Something I chose to do just because I wanted to learn." Harry understood that need more than Thornton probably realized. "What did you study in philosophy?" "Identity and authenticity, mostly. Questions about what makes us who we are, whether we're defined by the roles we play or by something deeper." The irony wasn't lost on Harry. Here was a security guard lecturing him about identity and authenticity, and it was more helpful than anything any royal advisor had ever told him. "So," Harry said, steering back to the original issue, "what happens now? Do you report this incident?" Thornton straightened slightly, the professional mask sliding back into place. "I'm required to log all interactions, sir, but my report will note that I followed proper protocol and that the situation was resolved appropriately with staff verification. And if someone asks why you didn't recognize me, I'll tell them the truth, sir. I was focused on security, not on faces. My job is to protect this palace and everyone in it, including you. I can't do that effectively if I'm making assumptions." Harry stood up, and Thornton immediately rose as well. "You know what, Sergeant? I'm going to make sure your supervisor hears about this incident." The worry flashed across Thornton's face again, but Harry continued quickly. "I'm going to tell them that you performed your duties exactly as you should have, that you demonstrated exactly the kind of vigilance and professionalism we need, and I'm going to recommend that you're used as an example in training for new security personnel." Thornton's expression shifted from worry to surprise to something that might have been pride. "Thank you, sir. That's very generous. It's not generous, it's deserved. Harry extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Thornton shook it. And Sergeant, the next time I try to enter that garden, I'll make sure I have my identification. I would appreciate that, sir, Thornton said with the hint of a smile. Harry turned toward the gate, which still stood open from when Gerald had unlocked it. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Thornton. One more thing. Those philosophy courses you took. Do you think people can change who they are, or are we stuck with the roles we're given? Thornton considered the question seriously. I think we're always both, sir. We have the roles we're given and the choices we make within those roles. The key is figuring out which parts are truly us and which parts are just the costume. Harry nodded slowly, feeling those words settle somewhere deep. Thank you, Sergeant Thornton. This has been more valuable than you know. As Harry finally stepped through the gate into the private gardens, he felt different somehow. The conversation had shaken something loose in him, some question he had been avoiding. He walked the familiar paths, seeing them with new eyes, thinking about identity and choice and the space between who he was expected to be and who he actually wanted to become. By the time Harry returned to his residence an hour later, the morning had fully arrived. The palace was coming alive with staff members hurrying about their duties, security personnel changing shifts, and the distant hum of London beyond the palace walls. But Harry felt as though he was carrying something quiet and precious from his walk, something that had nothing to do with the gardens themselves. His private secretary, Emma Richardson, was waiting in his study with an expression that suggested she had already heard about the incident. Emma had worked with Harry for 3 years, long enough to read his moods and anticipate his reactions. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," she said with careful formality. "I understand you had an interesting encounter this morning." Harry dropped into his chair, still wearing his casual clothes. "Let me guess, Gerald called you." "Gerald called everyone," Emma replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. "The head of security wants to speak with you about the incident. Sergeant Thornton's supervisor is concerned there might be a complaint, and your father's office has already inquired about whether this needs to be addressed at a higher level." Harry groaned. Of course they have. Why is it that a simple conversation at a garden gate becomes a palace-wide incident? Emma set down her tablet and looked at him directly. "Because nothing is simple when you're sixth in line to the throne. You know that." "What if I don't want it to be complicated?" Harry asked, surprising himself with the raw honesty in his voice. "What if I just want to have a conversation with someone without it becoming a security briefing and a protocol review?" Emma's expression softened. She had seen Harry struggle with his role before, but something about today felt different. What happened out there? Harry leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "I met someone who treated me like a person instead of a prince. Someone who did his job without fear or favor, who questioned me when he should have, and who talked to me about philosophy and identity like I was just another person trying to figure out life." "Sergeant Thornton." "Yes, and it made me realize how rare that is. How trapped I feel most of the time by expectations and protocols, and the weight of this title that I never asked for." Emma sat down across from him. "What do you want to do about it?" It was the right question, the one that cut through all the noise. What did he want to do? Not what was expected, not what protocol demanded, but what he actually wanted. "I want to make sure Thornton doesn't get punished for doing his job correctly," Harry said first. "That's non-negotiable." "Consider it done," Emma assured him. "What else?" Harry was quiet for a long moment. "I want to talk to someone about this. Not a press secretary or a royal advisor. Someone who understands what it's like to feel trapped by duty." "Your brother." Harry shook his head. "William's different. He's accepted his role in a way I never have. He sees it as destiny. I see it as a cage." "Then who?" "I don't know yet," Harry admitted. "But this morning showed me something. I've been going through the motions for so long, playing the part, that I've forgotten there might be another way, not to abandon duty but to find myself within it. Emma studied him carefully. This is about more than a garden gate, isn't it? It's about everything, Harry said quietly. The charity work that's chosen for me, the public appearances that are scheduled without my input, the relationships that are scrutinized and judged. I'm 30 years old and I still feel like I'm asking permission to live my own life. You are 30 years old, Emma pointed out gently, which means you have the power to make changes. Not easily and not without consequences, but you're not a child anymore. You can choose. The word echoed what Sergeant Thornton had said about his own life. Choice. It seemed so simple, yet so impossibly complex when you were born into a role that had been defined for centuries. Harry's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed it was his brother. He let it go to voicemail. "You'll have to talk to him eventually," Emma said. "I know, just not right now." The rest of Harry's day unfolded in the usual way. Meetings with charity directors, a briefing about an upcoming public engagement, a fitting for a uniform he would wear to some ceremonial event. Each item on his schedule felt mechanical, performed by rote. But underneath it all, something was shifting. During a break between appointments, Harry found himself searching online for information about identity and authenticity. He discovered philosophers he had never heard of, ideas about the authentic self versus the social self, theories about how people navigate between who they are and who they're expected to be. One passage struck him particularly hard. It was from a philosopher named Charles Taylor, writing about the importance of being true to oneself. The text argued that authenticity wasn't about rejecting all external demands, but about finding a way to honor both your inner truth and your responsibilities to others. Harry read the passage 3 times, feeling something click into place. He didn't have to choose between being a prince and being himself. The challenge was finding a way to be both, to fulfill his duties while also honoring his own needs and desires. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from William asking if everything was okay. Harry stared at the message for a long moment before typing a response. "I'm fine, just thinking about some things. Can we talk tomorrow?" The reply came quickly. "Of course, worried about you." Harry smiled despite himself. For all their differences, William did care. The problem was that William's care often came wrapped in expectations and advice about duty and tradition. What Harry needed was understanding, not solutions. That evening, Harry did something he rarely allowed himself to do. He canceled his dinner plans, a formal meal with representatives from one of his patronages, citing a headache. It wasn't entirely untrue. His head did ache, but not from physical pain. From the weight of too many thoughts crowding in at once. Instead of the formal dinner, he ordered takeaway food and sat in his private sitting room, eating directly from the containers while watching a documentary about mountain climbing. The climbers in the film talked about pushing limits, about finding themselves in extreme conditions, about the freedom that came from choosing a difficult path. There was a knock at the door. Harry considered ignoring it, but Emma's voice came through. "I know you're in there, and I know you're probably eating something completely inappropriate for a royal dinner. Can I come in?" Despite everything, Harry laughed. "Come in." Emma entered, took one look at the takeaway containers and shook her head with mock disapproval. "Thai food from the containers. Your grandmother would be appalled." "My grandmother eats breakfast from Tupperware when she's at Balmoral," Harry countered. "I've seen it." Emma sat down, and for a moment they just existed in comfortable silence. Finally, she spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning, about feeling trapped. And I think you should talk to someone. Not me, not William. Someone professional who deals with this kind of thing." "You mean a therapist?" Harry's tone was defensive. "I mean someone who can help you work through what you're feeling without judgment. Someone who can help you figure out what you actually want instead of what everyone expects you to want. Harry set down his food. That feels like admitting failure. No, Emma said firmly. That feels like taking control of your own well-being. You spent years in the military, right? You know that soldiers get counseling for trauma. This isn't different. You've spent your entire life dealing with expectations and pressures that most people can't even imagine. That takes a toll. What would people say if they knew Prince Harry was seeing a therapist? Honestly, I think most people would respect it. Mental health isn't the taboo it used to be, and you've already done work with veterans dealing with PTSD. How is this different? It was a good point, one that Harry couldn't easily dismiss. He had championed mental health causes, had spoken openly about the challenges veterans faced, but applying that same openness to his own struggles felt dangerous somehow, like admitting weakness. 3 days passed before Harry saw Sergeant Thornton again. In that time, he had followed Emma's advice and arranged a discreet consultation with a therapist who specialized in working with people in high-pressure roles. The first session had been difficult, forcing Harry to articulate feelings he had kept buried for years, but it had also been liberating in a way he hadn't expected. The therapist, Dr. Sarah Whitman, had asked him a simple question in their first meeting. What do you want? Not what should you want, not what others expect you to want. Just what do you want? Harry had found himself unable to answer immediately. The question seemed so basic, yet it exposed something he had been avoiding his whole life. He had spent so long reacting to what others wanted from him that he had lost touch with his own desires. Now, walking through the palace grounds on a crisp autumn afternoon, Harry found himself drawn back to the private garden gate. Sergeant Thornton was there, standing at his post with the same professional bearing as before. "Good afternoon, Sergeant," Harry said as he approached. Thornton turned and immediately stood at attention. "Your Royal Highness." There was a new formality in his voice, a distance that hadn't been there during their first encounter. Harry noticed it immediately. "You can relax, Sergeant. I'm not here on official business." But Thornton remained stiff, his eyes focused somewhere over Harry's shoulder. "Sir, I wanted to apologize again for the incident the other day. I've completed additional facial recognition training to ensure it doesn't happen again." Harry felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. Facial recognition training? Who ordered that? "My supervisor, sir. Standard procedure after a recognition failure." "It wasn't a failure," Harry said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I told you that. I told everyone that." "Yes, sir. However, protocols require additional training in such circumstances." The warmth and openness from their first conversation had vanished, replaced by rigid professionalism. Harry realized with disappointment that the palace machinery had done what it always did, grinding individual moments into standardized procedures. "Sergeant Thornton, look at me, please." Thornton's eyes shifted to meet Harry's, but the connection from before was gone. He looked at Harry the way all the guards did, with professional courtesy but no real recognition of the person beneath the title. "Did someone speak to you about our conversation?" Harry asked quietly. "About the things we discussed?" A flicker of something crossed Thornton's face. "I was reminded of proper protocols regarding interactions with members of the royal family, sir. Personal conversations beyond the scope of security duties are discouraged." "Discouraged by whom?" "Palace guidelines, sir." Harry felt anger rising, but also a deep sadness. He had found a moment of genuine human connection, and the system had immediately moved to shut it down. This was the cage he had been talking about with Emma. Not physical walls, but invisible barriers constructed from protocol and tradition and fear. "I'm sorry," Harry said, and Thornton looked confused. "I'm sorry that our conversation got you in trouble. That wasn't my intention." "I'm not in trouble, sir. Just reminded of proper procedures." "Which amounts to the same thing, doesn't it?" Harry gestured to the garden gate. "May I enter?" "Of course, sir." Thornton stepped aside with mechanical efficiency. Harry paused at the gate, then made a decision. "Sergeant, I want you to know something. That conversation we had meant something to me. What you said about identity and choice, about being more than the roles we play a Euros, it actually helped me. It made me think about things in a new way." Thornton's professional mask cracked slightly. "I appreciate that, sir, but I should not have spoken so freely. It was inappropriate." "No," Harry said firmly. "It was human, and that's what I needed. Not another person treating me like a china doll that might break if they say the wrong thing." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "You have children, right? 3 of them." "Yes, sir." "When they ask you about your day, about your work, what will you tell them about meeting me?" Thornton seemed uncertain how to answer. "I'll tell them I met Prince Harry, sir." "But will you tell them we talked? That we connected as 2 people who both served in the military, who both understand duty and struggle with it? Or will you just tell them about the security protocols?" Understanding dawned in Thornton's eyes. He saw what Harry was really asking. What story would survive this encounter? The human moment or the official version? "I don't know, sir," Thornton admitted quietly. "I suppose that depends on which version feels more real to me later." Harry nodded. "I'm trying to figure out the same thing. Which version of my life is real? The one where I'm a prince following scripts and protocols, or the one where I'm a person trying to figure out what matters to me?" "With respect, sir, can't both be real." "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Harry said. He pulled out his wallet and extracted a card of Euros, his actual identification, which he had started carrying after their first encounter. He held it up with a slight smile. "See, I learned my lesson." Thornton's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Appreciated, sir." Harry stepped through the gate but then stopped and turned back. "Sergeant Thornton, I'm going to be making some changes in my life. I don't know exactly what they are yet, but they're coming. And when people ask me later what prompted those changes, I'm going to tell them about a guard who did his job properly and taught me something about being authentic in the process." "Sir, I don't think I taught you anything." "You did, though. You showed me that it's possible to do your duty and still be yourself, to follow the rules but not lose your humanity in the process. That's harder than it sounds." Harry walked into the garden, leaving Thornton at his post. But as he made his way along the familiar paths, he realized something had shifted. The garden felt different now, not because it had changed, but because he was seeing it through new eyes. He found the bench near the fountain that he had mentioned to Thornton, the one where his mother used to read to him and William. He sat down, feeling the weight of memories, but also the possibility of something new. His phone rang. It was Dr. Whitman, their scheduled check-in call. "How are you doing?" she asked when he answered. "I just had a conversation that made me sad," Harry admitted, but also determined. "Tell me about it." Harry explained the encounter with Thornton, the way the palace had immediately moved to sanitize what had been a meaningful moment. "They can't help themselves," he said. "Everything has to fit into neat boxes, follow proper procedures. There's no room for actual human connection." "And how does that make you feel?" "Like I need to get out," Harry said, surprising himself with the bluntness of the statement. "Not necessarily leave the country or abandon my responsibilities, but find a way to breathe, to be more than just this role they've assigned me." "What would that look like?" Harry thought about it, really thought about it. "I don't know exactly, but it starts with honesty, with admitting that I'm struggling, that I have been for a long time. It continues with making choices for myself instead of just accepting what's been planned for me. And maybe it means finding people who see me as Harry first and a prince second." "That sounds like a good starting point," Dr. Whitman said. "But be prepared. When you start making changes, people will resist. They'll tell you it's selfish or irresponsible. They'll use duty and tradition as weapons to keep you in line." I know, Harry said. I've been hearing those arguments my whole life. So what's different now? Harry looked around the garden, at the fountain and the flower beds and the old oak tree with initials carved in it from decades ago. Now I understand that duty and authenticity don't have to be enemies. Sergeant Thornton showed me that. He does his duty faithfully, follows the rules, protects people. But he's also studying philosophy and raising kids and making choices about what matters to him. He's both things at once. And you want to be both things too. I need to be, Harry corrected. If I keep living only one way, only as the prince, I'll lose myself completely. I can feel it happening already. The following week, Harry did something that would have been unremarkable for anyone else but felt revolutionary for him. He requested a private meeting with the head of palace security, not to complain or make demands, but to have a conversation about how security protocols could balance safety with humanity. Commander James Hartley had served the royal family for 20 years and had seen princes and princesses come and go through various phases of rebellion and acceptance. He sat across from Harry in a secure conference room, probably expecting another complaint about restrictions or surveillance. "Commander," Harry began, "I want to talk about Sergeant Thornton." Hartley's expression became guarded. "If this is about the garden incident, sir, I can assure you appropriate measures have been taken." "That's exactly what I want to discuss," Harry said. "What measures?" "Additional training, review of protocols, enhanced facial recognition procedures." "All of which suggests Sergeant Thornton did something wrong," Harry pointed out. "But he didn't. He did everything right." Hartley shifted slightly in his seat. "With respect, sir, he failed to recognize a member of the royal family. He followed security protocols when confronted with an unidentified individual in casual clothing without credentials," Harry corrected. "That's not failure. That's exactly what you train people to do." "Perhaps, but the outcome was still inappropriate." Harry leaned forward. "Commander, let me ask you something. If that had been an intruder who looked like me, who was confident and well-spoken and claimed to belong here, would you have wanted Sergeant Thornton to wave them through, or to verify their identity?" "To verify, of course." "Then he did his job perfectly, and punishing him for it sends the wrong message to your entire team. It tells them that protecting us is less important than avoiding minor inconveniences." Hartley was quiet for a moment, processing this. "You raise a valid point, sir." "I do more than that," Harry said. "I'm formally requesting that Sergeant Thornton's record reflects that he performed his duties exemplarily during that incident, and I'm requesting that the additional training be removed from his file." "That's an unusual request, sir." "I'm aware, but I'm also aware that I have the right to make it, and I'm going to." Hartley studied Harry for a long moment. "May I speak candidly, sir?" "Please." "This isn't really about Sergeant Thornton, is it?" Harry considered lying, maintaining the fiction that this was purely about fairness for one guard. But part of his new commitment to authenticity meant being honest, even when it was uncomfortable. "No," he admitted. "It's about the fact that I had a meaningful conversation with another human being, and the immediate response was to make sure it never happens again. It's about living in a system that treats genuine connection as a security risk." "Human connection can be a security risk," Hartley said carefully. "People get close to members of the royal family for all sorts of reasons, not all of them good." "I know that. I'm not naive about the threats we face. But there has to be a middle ground between total isolation and reckless vulnerability. Sergeant Thornton and I talked about philosophy and duty for 20 minutes. That conversation didn't compromise my security. If anything, it reminded me why security matters to Euros, because there are things worth protecting." Hartley nodded slowly. "What do you want, sir, really?" "I want the people who protect us to be able to see us as people, not just assignments. I want to be able to have a conversation without it generating reports and reviews. I want to live in a way that honors both my responsibilities and my humanity." "That's a tall order, sir." "I know, but I'm going to start trying. And it begins here, with making sure Sergeant Thornton isn't punished for treating me like a person who needed to show identification instead of a prince who should be automatically recognized." To Harry's surprise, Hartley smiled slightly. "You know, sir, when I first joined the Royal Protection Command, I worked with your mother's detail. She used to say something similar, that the protocols were important, but so was remembering why we had them. To protect people worth protecting, not to create a gilded cage." The mention of his mother hit Harry unexpectedly hard. She said that many times. She pushed back against security restrictions that she felt were excessive, made us justify every limitation we imposed. Sometimes she was right, sometimes we were, but the conversation mattered. Harry felt something unlock in his chest. "I've been so focused on how different I am from the rest of the family that I forgot I might have learned some of these feelings from her." "She would have been proud of what you said just now," Hartley said quietly. "About Sergeant Thornton, about humanity and duty. Those were her values too." "Will you do it, adjust his record?" "I'll do better than that," Hartley said. "I'll make sure the incident is recorded as an exemplary example of proper protocol execution, and I'll recommend him for commendation." Harry stood and extended his hand. "Thank you, Commander." As he left the meeting, Harry felt lighter than he had in months. This was a small victory, barely a footnote in the grand scheme of royal life, but it mattered. It was a choice he had made, a stand he had taken, however small. Over the next few weeks, Harry began making other changes. Small ones at first. He started saying no to engagements that felt performative rather than meaningful. He spent more time on charity work that genuinely interested him rather than work that looked good in photographs. He continued his therapy sessions with Dr. Whitman, slowly unraveling years of unexamined assumptions about who he was supposed to be. One morning, almost a month after the Garden Gate incident, Harry found himself walking the same path at the same early hour. Sergeant Thornton was at his post, and this time when Harry approached, there was a subtle shift in the guard's demeanor. Not unprofessional, but warmer somehow. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Thornton said with a slight smile. "I trust you have your identification today." Harry patted his pocket with a grin. "Never leave home without it now." "Excellent, sir." Thornton unlocked the gate. Then, lowering his voice slightly, he added, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. The commendation. My family was very proud." "You earned it, Sergeant. I just made sure it was recognized." Still, it meant something. Harry paused at the gate. "Can I ask you something? That question I posed to you before about what you'd tell your children. What did you decide?" Thornton considered for a moment. "I told them I met a prince who asked me questions about philosophy and treated me with respect. I told them about the conversation, not just the title. They were more impressed by that than by the fact that I met royalty." "Smart kids," Harry said. "They get it from their mother," Thornton replied with a hint of pride. Harry walked into the garden, but this time the gate didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like what it was supposed to be: Euros, a threshold between spaces, not a wall between worlds. He made his way to the fountain bench and sat down, pulling out his phone. There was a message from Emma asking about his schedule for the next month. There was a text from William suggesting lunch, and there was a reminder about his next therapy session. Harry looked at all of it, the familiar weight of obligation and schedule, but now it felt different. Not lighter exactly, but more manageable, because he understood something he hadn't before. He wasn't just Prince Harry, sixth in line to the throne. He was also just Harry, a man trying to figure out how to live authentically while honoring his responsibilities. The two didn't have to be at war. They could coexist if he was brave enough to insist on it. He thought about Sergeant Thornton, about Emma, about Dr. Whitman. about his mother whom he barely remembered but whose influence he was only now beginning to understand. All of them, in their own ways, had shown him that it was possible to be both dutiful and authentic, to fulfill obligations while still maintaining your humanity. The garden around him was beautiful in the morning light, the same as it had always been. But Harry saw it differently now, not as an escape from his life, but as a reminder that beauty and peace were possible even within constraints. The walls around the garden didn't make the flowers less real. The protocols around his life didn't have to make his experiences less genuine. His phone buzzed with another message, this one from a charity he worked with, asking if he could attend an event for veterans dealing with mental health challenges. Harry smiled and typed back a response. Yes, and I'd like to speak, if that's possible, about my own experiences with therapy and mental health. I think it's time to be honest about my own journey. It was a small step, maybe even a scary one, but it felt right. It felt like Harry, not just His Royal Highness. As he sat in the garden, surrounded by memories and possibilities, Harry realized that the incident at the gate had been more than just a moment of awkwardness or a story to laugh about later. It had been a catalyst, a crack in the armor that had let light in. Sergeant Thornton had stopped him at a gate and asked for identification. In doing so, he had inadvertently asked Harry a much deeper question. Who are you, really? Not your title, not your position, but who are you? Harry was still figuring out the answer. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he had permission to ask the question at all. And that, more than any royal privilege or protocol, felt like freedom. He stood up from the bench, ready to face whatever the day would bring. As he walked back toward the palace, he saw Sergeant Thornton still at his post, standing guard over the threshold between public and private, duty and choice. Harry raised his hand in a small wave. Thornton nodded back, professional but warm. Two men who understood duty, who struggled with identity, who had found a moment of genuine connection in an unlikely place. The gate closed behind Harry, but he didn't feel locked in. He felt, for perhaps the first time, like he was choosing to be there, and that made all the difference.